Pelin Ayan Musil. I come from Prague. I'm actually Turkish, but I'm working in Prague already 5 years as a faculty member in Anglo-American University. And my main research interests are actually democratization and party politics. And I mostly conducted my research in the field of Turkish politics, but I think there are some lessons that can be derived, and we can use the Turkish case to be able to understand the Hungarian case better, and that's maybe what I will try to do in my speech today. And I will also try to end my talk with a few comments on the possible causes of democratic erosions, because this is what is happening in Hungary and Turkey. And like we see a regression from liberal democratic norms to more illiberal path. So what we experience today in Hungary and Turkey is democratic erosion at the conceptual level, which means like gradual weakening of democratic institutions, which are led by those that are elected. So how is this done? How are they doing this? Incumbents, they come to power and they come with a parliamentary supermajority and they pass regulations undermining the rule of law, use their privileged access to state sources, eagerness to control the media, and which would lead to a violation of the principle of electoral fairness. So, but in my comparison, maybe what we can see is that there are different variations and degrees of maybe democratic erosion. And Hungary is still, I would say, it's a much better place because I wouldn't call Hungary as an illiberal democracy, actually. I wouldn't call it. And if we look at the scores from Freedom House and other think tanks, that it's rather a regression from liberal to illiberal democracy. But I would say Hungary is a democracy which experienced an illiberal turn, but it is still not illiberal democracy, I would say. Well, the examples of this illiberal turn are already mentioned. This restriction on political advertising in independent media outlets, and this very restrictive media legislation, consolidation of the media regulation in one government body, distortion of the freedom of information, and most importantly, maybe a weaker position of the Constitutional Court is what we observe in Hungarian case, which is bypassed by the parliamentary supermajority. Well, but if you compare it with Turkey, we would see that actually Turkey is the actual illiberal democracy, which is on the path to electoral autocracy, I would say. The scores that Turkey received from Freedom House has not really changed, because there is a progress on one side, whereas there is a regression on the other side. Turkey was mostly criticized for being a tutelary democracy, which means that the military had a really large role in civilian politics. Well, this has bettered, like where military has lost its power today, the civil liberty dimension in Turkey has really regressed thanks to the government, the AKP government. The custody of thousands of individuals, including Turkish activists, Kurdish activists, journalists, students, union leaders, are all some indicators of this backlash in civil liberties. And the Freedom House report indicates that the independence of the judiciary is at high risk. Maybe we should make the distinction between Hungary and Turkey a bit clearer to see how Hungary is actually at a better place. And that's why I call it a democracy with an illiberal turn, but not an illiberal democracy. First of all, if you look at both countries, they both experienced anti-government protests against the authoritarian tendencies of their governments. And what did the Orban government do? For instance, on the protest against the proposed tax on internet in November 2014, it sparked a really large protest. But he actually stepped back, right? He withdrew the proposal. However, when we saw similar protests happening in Turkey, we saw that the Erdogan government responded with more repression. And he repressed basically the protests, declaring them anti-democratic. The repression of protests ended with 8 fatalities, and the people responsible for these fatalities received minimum or almost no penalty. So there is some distinction in this level. Then another distinction may be that any party who comes to power is a single-party government, of course, manipulates the electoral system and tries to take it to its advantage. And we see it actually in Western democracies as well, like all this gerrymandering and so on. But what happened in Turkey? Turkey experienced something worse. Likewise in Hungary, they also dealt with some legislations giving less fair conditions to opposition parties. But what it experienced in, for instance, 2014 local elections was that the first time we witnessed some electoral fraud, which happened, for instance, there were power cuts while the votes were being counted. And then actually the government said that it was caused by cats that entered transformers. So there was actually, now we are seeing some sort of fraud that's happening in elections, which is actually a backlash. It's a path to electoral autocracy, which is not the case for Hungary, I guess. So my limited time will not allow me to further elaborate the differences, but I will try to comment very briefly on why the democratic erosion can happen. Why do we experience these erosions in civil liberties? And by looking at these two cases, and I hope understanding the causes of erosions can help us better predict and formulate maybe better policy recommendations. These are two very different countries with very different political backgrounds and history, yet the outcome we see is similar. A major victory of two conservative right-wing parties led by populist, charismatic leaders. Okay? So how do they get elected and how did they get re-elected? Is despite the authoritarian measures they have taken. Well, one explanation is always this economic crisis thing, which is like that Erdogan consolidated his power after an economic crisis, and Hungary and Orban came to power after the global financial crisis. But I find these economic explanations a bit too reductionist. Because yes, it does provide a favorable setting for these leaders to emerge, but there is something more, I would say. I think that the populist leaders, these type of leaders and parties, come to power after we see that the society really feels worn off, feels that the major segments of the society feels othered by some dominant groups. Okay, and then that considered as the periphery of some central actors. And then at these moments, the leaders, these charismatic populist leaders, arise, using their ability to manipulate these norms. And then we see the manipulation of these feelings. In the Turkish case, it was, I hope that I'm not going too far. In the Turkish case, it was the religious Muslim society, which was othered in Turkey historically. So it was always that there was this secularist, top-down, coercive modernization going on, which othered and which put these Muslim religious segments of the society to the periphery. And they felt intimidated by this process. And these military interventions closed down the religious parties, constitutional courts made decision against them, and so these religious segments felt less and less powerful and less represented in decision-making mechanisms. And Erdogan came and consolidated his power just when these memories of coups and party closures were so vivid. And indeed, he actually went further, successfully repressed the power of military. And in the Hungarian case, similarly, the feeling of otherness, I think, comes in the European context. it seems, of course, my observations are not, I cannot be as confident as I am in the observations of Hungarian case as I am in the Turkey. But what seems to me that Orban emerged at a time when Hungarian society was also feeling worn off from being considered as the other of Europe. Like Hungary, along with other post-socialist societies, wanting to have the same level of welfare by Western societies, which they thought they were deprived from during communism, and all member states not providing these sufficient opportunities to these Eastern counterparts. I'm not saying that they didn't provide opportunities, but let's focus more on the perceptions of the society, which is what matters. They thought that they did not receive the equal opportunities, and they felt othered by these Western counterparts. And at this moment, I think Orban, a charismatic leader, the person capable to manipulate these values, emerged and gained such a great power. So I think that this is my very simple explanation. What will happen in the future? I mean, now that they are in power, you already mentioned that there are some intra-party conflicts going on. So as long as these conflicts will not dissolve the parties, and as long as the society thinks the government does good in economic sense, they will continue to hold power. But only if these intra-party conflicts and economic situation does not go better. Because they have access to state sources, they have patronage networks, and so on. And of course, whether the EU can influence, I would probably provide these more to the debate session. But it is, I think, natural to consider that once a party is in power, as the theories suggest, they would seek all means to sustain it. So what should be done, rather, what should the opposition do maybe, as well as EU, we could talk about it.